Welcome to the new series of Speak Up, the television and social media platform for Freemasonry in New Zealand. I am Barry Rushton, your host, and thank you for joining us this evening. My first guest tonight is all the way from the UK, Worshipful Brother Dr. Mike Kinsley, who is about midway on an Australasian speaking tour sponsored by the Australian and New Zealand Masonic Research Council. If he comes to a town near you, then gather your friends to see him. His talks are enthralling, entertaining and engaging. I cannot speak highly enough of Dr. Mike Kinsley. Following the doctor is a young fellow, another recipient of the Freemasons University Scholarship. It's Jack Woodbury from Victoria University. Now and again, travelling around the country, you'll find great Masonic buildings. Our regular contributor, Graham Houston, has found one such building at the bottom of New Zealand. It's the Invercargill Masonic building, and he's here tonight to tell us all about it. I am privileged tonight to introduce my first guest, Worshipful Brother Mike Kinsley. Dr. Mike, it is great to see you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for inviting me.
All the way from the UK.
All the way from sunny UK.
Sunny UK. It is a privilege to have you here, and thanks for being with us tonight. Now, I know, for the viewers will not know this, but I do, that you're in the middle of an Australasian tour, a lecture tour, which sounds fantastic, right? I hear that it's going great.
Well, people are telling me that they're enjoying it, which is really good, you know.
Where did it start?
It started in Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, Hong Kong. Then I did all the centres in Australia and Tasmania, came over to New Zealand, and the intention was to do the whole of New Zealand, but my wife became a little unwell, so we held back for a few weeks, and I've done most of the North Island now, and I'll be doing the South Island just after Christmas.
So now the speaking tour, that's actually
Yes.
sponsored by the Australian New Zealand Masonic Research Council, correct?
It is.
So tell me why they do that, and what's the whole thing about?
Okay, that ANZMRC is the union, if you wish, of all of the research lodges in Australia, New Zealand and the Far East. And what they do is every 2 years they have a conference. Last year was Melbourne, next year is Dunedin, but in between they invite a guest speaker to tour the area, and they hope that it'll be entertaining. And part of that is that you provide a book and you have all sorts of chapters and presentations in it, and the lodges choose whichever presentation they want. So that's what it's about.
Which is fantastic, and I will come on to that book very shortly.
Yeah.
Just for the viewer's sake, you were born in the UK,
Yeah.
came to New Zealand,
Yeah.
and you started your Masonic career in a lodge in New Zealand.
I
correct?
did, in Howrah,
Harawa.
number 34.
I know Harawa well, just down
Yeah.
from New Plymouth where I
Yep.
used to live a bit. Now you also too, then you went back to England, right, and you
Yep.
did a doctorate back there.
I did.
And I believe you joined a musical lodge.
I did.
Right there. That must have been fun.
It was. In fact, I was playing in a band, I'm sure we'll talk about that, and one of the guys in the band, well, two of them actually were Masons, but they said, oh, we're in a lodge that you might be interested in. It's a musician's lodge. And what we do is we meet on a Saturday, we open and close the lodge as quickly as we possibly can, then we go and join our wives and friends, and we have a concert for an hour. And then we have lunch. And I said, this sounds like my kind of lodge. And I joined it, and of course the rest is history. It was the tip of the iceberg, as you can imagine. And I got more and more and more involved.
Now, you've always been involved in or interested in history, haven't you?
Yeah, always.
All the time. And I believe over time that you joined the preeminent research lodge in the UK?
Yes.
Which is...
Quattro Coronati.
That's a beauty.
If you can say it, you're in.
Number 2076, I'll put that bit in, which is
Yes.
And in 2011, you were awarded the Norman Spencer Award, right?
Yes, that was before they invited me to join. It interested me, and then I thought, well, why don't I put a paper in, and which I did, for the Norman Spencer Prize, and I won it. And so then afterwards they sort of said, well, you're a likely lad and you're keen and you obviously like writing things, why don't you think about joining? Which I said, yes, that'd be lovely, thank you.
Now the thing that's quite intriguing is that the paper that you put in, I think, was the history of Grand Lodge in New Zealand.
Formation of the Grand Lodge in New Zealand.
Formation of the Grand Lodge in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Tell us why you actually thought that that would be a good topic to put in.
Because I'd come from New Zealand.
Oh, that's
so I had
given.
sort of experience of New Zealand lodges, and I thought it was different. And it's actually an interesting story. It's called An Exercise in Brotherly Love or Lack of It. Unfortunately, three warring, well, they became warring Grand Lodges, English, Irish and Scottish, operating in New Zealand, who then decide, well, wouldn't it be better if we are all one Grand Lodge of New Zealand? What a good idea. Well, it wasn't quite so easy to achieve.
And there still are those constitutions in New Zealand.
So we moved to 4. So instead of having
yeah,
3,
exactly.
they moved to 4.
Exactly, and that is true.
Still the case.
In 2014, again, you were awarded the Prestonian lectureship.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
That in itself is a one-time event. You can only win it. You can only do it once, right? And in that time, you present papers, or you write a number of papers, or you present on behalf of the lodge.
Right. What happens is it's a commemoration, if you wish, of William Preston, who was a bit of a bad boy to begin with, Mason, anyway, but never mind. And what they do is he left some money, 300 guineas actually, to be paid to any well-skilled Mason who would create a lecture, and each year they would choose one person to be the Prestonian lecturer, give him a nice little badge, and he would go around presenting his lecture. By the way, none of the Prestonian lecturers have ever seen any of the money. The 3, never seen any of it. There's a surprise. But
it's probably building up in some kitty
it's building
somewhere.
up, yes, exactly right. The interest is building. So each year they choose a different person, and 2014 I was fortunate that they said, well, we'll have you. And it's quite a challenge. I did 45 lectures throughout the world in my year.
Not only a challenge, I'm sure, what a great honour, what a great award.
Fantastic.
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 Now, I think it's the effort involved with preparing things goes along with the fact that in 2013 you became the editor of a quarterly magazine from England called The Square.
The Square.
And we'll get a copy of that like that.
Yes.
And I believe there's even a picture of you as editor.
Yes,
here.
that wasn't one of mine,
No, that
but I
wasn't,
think you've got one of mine.
But that certainly is a picture of you, and we'll come up on that shortly.
There I am.
So that in itself has got to be a huge accomplishment. I mean, and I've looked through these magazines, and they're full of articles. To try and pull that together every 3 months is a big job, right? And you did that for 4 years.
4 years. 4 times a year, 4 years. People pay to get this magazine. It's the only independent magazine for English Masons. It goes worldwide. So you have to sit back and say, what are they interested in? Yeah. What would they be interested in Boise, Idaho? And Bombay, and try to have a range of interesting articles. And what I wanted it to be was not what the Americans call grip and grin, charity collections, people being nominated for awards and all the names. I wanted something that was a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
And so I purposely put things in which I hoped would initiate discussion, controversy, and I think I sort of achieved that.
Now, I believe the new editor, am I correct, or maybe one after you as well, is a lady, correct?
Yes, Philippa. Philippa Fawkes, is now Philippa Lee, and she's taking it over. So she's doing very well.
Now, we know that you being in New Zealand, you are doing the lecture tour, and with that goes this lovely book that you've actually put together, of course, called The Square, on the Square rather.
Yes.
And in here, of course, are the 12 lectures that you will give depending on which the lodge wants, right?
Yes.
They are all one of the ones that I've seen, and I was lucky enough to be at one of your lectures last night, which I'll talk about in a second. Yeah. But of the 12 that are there, are there a couple that are more favourites than the other?
Yes, of course. The 2 most popular ones would be, firstly, the one that you saw yourself last night, which is the Roberta Calvi, the man hanging under Blackfriars Bridge.
Just a fantastic story.
Was it the Mafia? Was it the Masons? Or was it the Vatican?
Question mark.
What done him in? Yeah. And the other is actually the Prestonian itself, which is the first year of the United Grand Lodge of England. 2 warring Masonic committees, arch enemies for 60 years, forced to come together in committee and form a union, which they didn't want. So we had some interesting events going on.
Mike, last night in the Roberto Calvi presentation you gave, of course, there's always mystique and a bit of sort of interest in subterfuge, potential, and conspiracy theories. Talking about what a lot of people in the public have seen, of course, is the Dan Brown movies and books and things like that.
Yeah.
What do you think your whole take is on all that? I know it's an interesting little story, but how do you feel about that type of thing?
Well, it's very interesting, and it links in very well. A friend of mine was Michael Bagent, who actually was very active in creating the oration scheme in England with Spenny Northampton. And of course, it was Michael who wrote the book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Do you remember that?
Yes, indeed.
And then when Dan Brown came out with his book, The Da Vinci Code, Michael said, he's pinched all my ideas from my book, and he sued Dan Brown. A huge mistake. It cost him everything, and eventually it cost him his health and his life, I think. So it was very, very sad. I think Dan Brown realized these are good stories, and it will make a very good novel, you know, once you twist it a little bit. I think quite a few people probably think that Dan Brown hasn't got a very high opinion of Freemasonry. You know, we're all assassins and satanic plots and goodness knows whatever. So the interesting thing is that he was invited to present to the Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction in the United States. And he couldn't make it because he's had another book, The Lost Symbol, coming out. He wrote a very, very interesting letter in which he said he was sorry he couldn't make it, but he wanted them to know how highly he regarded Freemasonry, how men of different cultures and backgrounds and faiths could come together and break bread in brotherly love and harmony, and he wished us all very, very well. And then when he came to England to be interviewed about his books, guess where he was interviewed?
No, don't tell
me. In Freemasons' Hall
is that a
on
fact?
Great Queen Street.
Far out.
Yes, so that was very, very interesting. But, you know, like a lot of people, he knows that all of this stuff sells.
Yeah.
It sounds good.
Well, we had a guest on at the beginning of the series, the second series, and a new Freemason. And his semi-basic introduction to Freemasonry was through one of Dan Brown's books, because he was intrigued anyway. And then when he started reading that, he thought, oh, maybe there's a bit more to it. And then, of course, you know, you won't necessarily find the truth in the Dan Brown book, but it led him at least to saying, okay, what's this Freemasonry all about?
Yeah.
And so consequently, he is and will become a far better Freemason than a man because of a little kickstart from a book like that, you know.
To be clear, sorry, go on.
No, go.
Well, to be clear, all of this nonsense that's talked about Freemasonry really comes from the 1920s and 30s, from the time of the dictators in Europe. And they were against Freemasonry. Well, wouldn't you be? You don't want middle-class men who are influential.
Thinking for themselves.
Thinking for themselves and meeting behind a closed door, you know, whatever. So they suppressed Freemasonry, and they made up the most outrageous stories about Freemasonry, sex magic, satanic rites, goodness knows what. And we, in response to that, went into total secrecy. Got rid of all of the membership lists and all of that kind of thing. And it's taken us years to come out of that. And in the meantime, all of these stories of all the terrible things that we're supposed to do still persist. But I hope slowly it's being washed away.
That is quite so, isn't it? Once a blanket sort of covering goes over you, to dig yourself out of that for no great reason takes forever and forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, as I said at the beginning, that I knew you were coming on today, and so I knew you were speaking last night at United Masters, which I think will probably be your New Zealand Lodge I'm picking. You know?
Yes,
that's the one that I'm sure that you'll gravitate towards. 167.
They're pretty desperate.
They're good folk.
Not really.
And I was in the audience, and I was enthralled about that story.
Oh, thank you.
And that's just one of 12, and I am certainly going to read the others. And any of the Freemasons watching the show, I will really urge you at some stage, and we'll put the website up towards the end, that to actually purchase this book, because it's very reasonable cost-wise and extremely, extremely interesting, to be frank. Now, you're heading back to the South Island again soon,
I am.
I think, which is great.
Good.
I didn't actually want to...
Can I just say, Barry, of the book, not everything in the book people will agree with. Some things in the book people might be a bit shocked about. My intention was not to be destructive or shock people, but to initiate discussion.
Great.
And that's the purpose. I say in the book, it doesn't bother me if people disagree. Strongly disagree. Mike, you know, you're a dead man. But I will be upset if they're bored.
Oh, very good.
And I don't think they're boring stories.
Now, I know that as you go around these tours, I won't say necessarily in New Zealand, but overseas, you're really also quite passionate about a particular charity that, I don't know if some of this money goes to it as well or not, but it is a great charity, I believe. It's called Deborah.
Deborah.
And for those who look it up, and I'll try and get this out if I can, it's dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa.
That's near enough.
That's pretty close, right? Research Association, right? It is a terrible sort of disease, isn't it? And when it's where the linings of the body
the skin doesn't work.
Yeah, it just doesn't work, and people can turn over in bed and
your skin's bleeding, falling off,
and
hours of bandaging. It can attack any family. With no history of it, and the child is born with this pain, suffering, and of course, as they get older, there's a mental worth of scarring and so on. It's dreadful, absolutely dreadful.
So please forgive me for asking this, but was there anybody close to you that had... No?
Not at all.
So how did you find this amongst the
so many
myriad
charities?
others?
When I would do presentations, I would ask people in the lodge, are there any particular charities that you are supporting? Because I'm happy to support it. And somebody came up, can't even remember who it was, but somebody came up one day and said, have you heard of Deborah? I said, no, never heard of it.
Ex-girlfriend, maybe?
Gave me a brochure on it. They were obviously involved with it. And I read the brochure, and it was appalling. I thought, this is truly dreadful. I'd never heard of it. And then when I did the Prestonian, I wanted a charity that was that you could use worldwide. It wasn't just for Middlesex or England, you know, or whatever. And it ticks all the boxes. Children, worldwide, can attack anybody. And so I thought it was a really, really good charity. And when I checked, the patron was Sophie, Countess of Wessex.
Wow.
And the president was Michael Portillo when he's not on a train somewhere in Europe. And I thought, well, you know, it's well supported. It's kosher, you know, if I can put it that way.
I think it's like all charities, it's worthwhile for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we really, really wish you the best for the rest of your tour down there, and it's been such a pleasure having you A, on the show, and B, for me to be in the audience. And I strongly urge any Freemasons watching and we'll put up the website in a second on how to get the book, because I just know they will enjoy it. As you say, there will be discussion points on there that they might say, well, but at least it makes them think, you know.
I hope so.
And it's a very entertaining read, the one that I read last night when I got home.
There will be a test.
I'll be ready for it. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you,
Dr. Mike.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's our pleasure indeed.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce to you another recipient of the Freemason Scholarship Award. Jack Woodbury, all the way from Victoria, Wellington. It is good to see you, mate.
Nice to see you too, thank you.
Now tell me, the award, Freemasons Award, any Freemasons in your family at all? Or
No.
just all. So they came out, you applied for the scholarship, they looked at what you were doing, and they said, this guy's worthy of $10,000.
Which is incredibly generous.
Did you have a big party in Wellington? Was there anything?
No, I've been responsible. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's really wonderful to have that kind of support from an organisation, particularly considering I'm studying arts, which is as some people tend to think about it, not exactly an economically wise decision. So it's great to have the support of.
And so apart from the obvious, do you use the scholarship itself helps you with your fees, or just helps you survive? And
it's
buys you equipment to do?
Mostly for equipment and resources and that sort of thing.
Great.
Part of the irony with working with sound is that you don't make a hell of a lot of money, especially at university, and then all the gear's super expensive. So it's kind of bad on both sides of that equation. But
you see, you're talking to a baby boomer, you know, a guy who grew up with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, you know. And I have gone on to the Vimeo, and looked at what you had produced. It's called A Tree Falls.
Yes.
And it's look, to be frank, it was very confusing to me. You know, I sort of can't quite get into it. What's happening? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so it's sort of a distillation of a number of ideas that I've been working with sort of since the start of my undergraduate studies at Vic, really. And it comes out of a little bit of frustration to some extent. So I'd be developing these, art music pieces. And occasionally it would be for slightly more complex sort of presentation formats. So normally when you listen to music, you've got headphones, or you've got a pair of speakers, and they sort of just put music onto you. But I've been working with things like octaphonic arrays, which are sort of 8 speakers around you in a circle. And these sorts of things achieve the same sort of immersive audio experience as, say, a surround sound system for a home theatre, for example. You sort of sit in the environment, if you will. And I remember my dad asking me, can I listen to one of your pieces? And I go, yeah, sure. And I'd send him a link, and so he could download it and listen to it. And then he just played it on his phone speaker, which is fine, and it's entirely reasonable to do so. But it kind of ruins the experience to some extent. It's sort of a filter that I can't quite get past, if you will, as someone just sort of deciding to do something with the piece that is not really to do with my intent for it. So this was sort of sitting in the back of my mind, and I was thinking about this, and I realised that to some extent it's kind of like a filter, if you will. The audience is a bit of a filter So you can spend as long as you want making a piece of music and developing it and perfecting it, and whether or not it's an electronic piece that you press play on, or whether or not it's a piece for orchestra that you have performed in a concert, the way the audience feels, where they sit, what they think about the particular genre of music, you can't determine, and so it kind of takes the control away from you to some extent. So with that in mind, what a Trefoils is doing is essentially trying to make that audible. So taking the influence of the audience and making it heard, if you will. So the way that plays out is I use basically a little box with ultrasonic sensors in it, and don't worry about what exactly they do, but essentially they determine whether or not an audience member's there. And then if an audience member is there, the composition reacts in real time and says, hey, an audience member's here, and it starts breaking the piece apart.
See, it seems so complex to me. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, I saw that on the Vimeo. I saw you set up 4 speakers, and you had the big round.
Yeah,
that's the thing you're talking
interface
about,
box
right?
with ultrasonic
right?
sensors, yeah.
And then you had something playing, and then you sort of came into the field, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then it changes the way the music happens.
Yeah. So as I'm sort of talking about that notion of the audience being somewhat destructive in their impact on a piece, that sort of plays out audibly, if you will. So as you step in, the composition glitches. So the channels start turning off and on, and you start getting loud pops and bangs, and the piece slows down and speeds up, 4 or 5 times within about a millisecond, and then so on and so forth. And so basically, it's tying that gesture of trying to hear a piece, the audience trying to hear a piece, to the audience breaking a piece, if you will.
Incredible. You see, baby boomers like me. I mean, I've got this great place where I sit on the deck. I'm on my deck, and I've got 2 speakers up there and a bass speaker there, and I position myself, and I am in heaven with that combination. And I'll play stuff, and I just love it. Mine seems so simple, my concept, compared to where you're going in yours.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean,
it's a great thing.
On my way here, I had little earbuds and terrible quality earbuds listening to music, and I think that's just the beauty of music, is that you can go from listening to something on earbuds to going overseas to Europe and seeing like the Beast array of speakers, which is this massive sort of roof of speakers with hundreds of channels of audio in it. It's but music's just like that.
Well, Jack, we really wish you the best with your career, mate, and good on you. I think your dad and I would sort of join a little covers band and have just as much fun. I think, But
I think
it's great having you here, and all the best, and congratulations again on the scholarship.
Thank you.
Thank you. And closing out the show tonight, of course, is our regular contributor, Graham Houston. In the Masonic world, there's a review going on with buildings, especially even our iconic buildings, unfortunately. Graham, you're going to talk about one great iconic building tonight, I believe, right? Good to see you, mate.
Thank you, Barry.
Good on
Thank
you.
you. Yes, I want to talk to you about what's happening with buildings throughout New Zealand at the moment. The Freemasons throughout New Zealand have historically either owned their own buildings in their own right, or partnered up with another lodge to share the ownerships of a building. And that's just been a rite of passage.
Yeah.
What's happened with the demographic movement in New Zealand of population, that what were once thriving towns, and if you take Coromandel as an example, which had a very good fishing, mining and forestry unit, good population, suddenly it died. And populations moved, which meant the building still existed, but with fewer people to operate it and maintain it. That's happened a lot. The requirements of younger people today that are joining the lodge is not the same for lodge ownership. It's just somewhere to meet, and they put their effort into the community more so. Many of these buildings have become underutilised, but have high maintenance costs. The earthquake in Christchurch was a big wake-up call.
Monster.
Because we own properties, or the lodges own properties, not as real estate investors, but as places to hold their lodge meetings. And so the review, increased insurance premiums, high structural costs to earthquake strengthen the buildings, high insurance premiums, fewer members, outlying areas meant the buildings would become too expensive to maintain. And that just doesn't include the ordinary building, it includes some of our iconic buildings, and that's one of the ones I want to tell you about. The iconic Masonic Hall in 4th Street, Invercargill, down in Southland. To me, it's one of the best buildings of a Masonic building in New Zealand.
I think
one
you
of the
like
finest.
it, Graham. I think
I
you
like
like
it. It's a statement building. It states what the Masonic fraternity is about. Take a look at the columns in the front of the building there, of the Doric order. significant to Masons. Take a look at the steps that lead up to the building. Significant to Masons. Unfortunately, times have changed, and for 94 years that building has been part of Masonic history in New Zealand. But from 2020, it will no longer be so. It will be sold. Now, this building has a Category 1 Heritage Order placed on it in 1984 because of its significance. It sits on a raised site in Invercargill. It is very much right in the middle of the CBD. It's the site of the Southland markets on a Sunday morning, and has been for a long time. Wedding venues, show venues, conferences, it's used for that as well. It is just a landmark, and I've always believed it's the right building, but it's in the wrong town. I know it's in Invercargill and it's yours, but it should be in a Wellington or a Christchurch or an Auckland, a bigger place, so we can make a statement about what we're about. And that's the sad thing that came out of the earthquake review in Christchurch, was that Masons can no longer afford to maintain such big buildings round. The movement is towards centres where a number of lodges meet. People are mobile enough and people can move to and from.
That makes sense too, doesn't it? I mean, it makes it easier on the members. They can have a commercial arm. They can help pay for their building costs and rates and all that stuff. It certainly makes sense.
Well, that's right. And although the Masonic Hall does receive income from some of these ventures I just talked about, it is not substantial enough to cover it, and it will never but will be. And so the buildings today need to have a retail income stream or some sort of rental income stream in order to justify the costs. It's just a great iconic statement building, and it'll be a very sad loss to Freemasonry, but it will never ever be not a part of Freemasonry. It's been part of New Zealand. It's time to move on. The Masonic building will always be there. No matter who owns it, it'll always be recognised as it is, it was, it will continue to be, and have great significance for Masons in New Zealand. And what's more, in Invercargill will still know it as the Masonic building in Invercargill. It's iconic, it's a heritage building, so it will always be there.
Mate, we'll do Arrowtown and Queenstown next time.
Arrowtown's great. I need to go there to see that one.
Thank you, Graham. Terrific. Well, that's our show for this week. Don't forget, if you'd like to know more about Freemasonry, and you won't find it in a Dan Brown's book, but you will by going to the Grand Lodge website, which is freemasonsnz.org. In the meantime, if you've been thinking, planning, or asking questions about joining Freemasonry, we have a website for this very purpose. It's simply welcometofreemasonry.co.nz. We hold a regular dinner experience where you can meet other Freemasons before making a decision to join. So once again, thanks for joining us. See you next week.